how can we be of service to what the world really needs right now? Of course, there are issues around the environment, but also, how can we make the workplace a welcoming place for these new generations, and for them to help them to engage in what, for those of you who listened to the Professor Gez's conference last week, maybe engage in a form of renaissance. So I guess these will be, questions that are that will be underlined in the next debate. We are very, very lucky to greet two eminent people in these different subjects. So we have Sir Ronald Cohen, who is chair of the Global Steering Group for Impact Investment, co-founder of Apax Partners and Social Finance, and who's an international philanthropist. And we have Hubert Joly, who will be both on stage in just a second, who is the former CEO of Best Buy, founder of the Joly Family Chair in Purposeful Leadership at HEC, and now a senior lecturer at Harvard Business School. The debate will be moderated by Tanvi, who will present herself in just a moment, and I will leave the floor to the three of you and see you in about 14 minutes. Tanvi, are you there? Let's see. Where is Tanvi? Okay. Looking at the chat. Oh, here she is. Okay.
Apologies, everyone, for the technical difficulties. So, hello, everyone. I'm Tanvi Seth, part of the January intake of current MBA student at HEC Paris. It gives me immense pleasure to moderate this debate. So, without further ado, I will pose the first question for our eminent debaters. Business as a force for good. Is it a fad or is it inevitable? Will it be key to performance?
So we've agreed that I would go first. Tanvi, thank you so much for moderating the session. I'm privileged to share it with Hubert, whose work I have much admired. And my is that we're all very lucky to be living at this time. This time reminds me very much of the end of the 60s, when the force of the measurement of risk, the arrival of new technologies, and the arrival of entrepreneurship came to revolutionize our world. Today, we have three major forces, and this time they're working to shift the paradigm of our economies. The first force is a massive change in values, shared by a lot of you in this webinar with the HEC community, where we don't want to purchase the products of companies that are doing environmental and social harm, nor do we want to work for them. And our actions have shown investors that there are serious implications for the profitability of the investments they make. And so today we see $40 to $70 trillion of ESG investing, somewhere around half of all the world's professionally managed assets, going to achieve more than profit, going to achieve environmental and social impact. That's the first force. The second force is huge leaps in technology that enable us to improve lives and the planet in ways we could never have contemplated before. I'm thinking of AI, of artificial intelligence, of augmented reality, of computing and the genome coming together. And we see this driving a wave of technological change. It started in many ways in clean energy, but through this pandemic, we've seen it accelerate across our whole economies, with remote health, with remote training, with remote education, and myriads of other ways. And the third force, which I expect is new to most of you, is that this technology is enabling us to measure in a granular way the impacts of companies, much as we measure their profits. We are able today to measure the environmental impacts from the operations of companies, the impacts on people from their employment, and the impacts on people and the environment from their products. And the Impact Weighted Accounts Initiative, which I'm privileged to chair at Harvard Business School, gives us a peep into the future. I would encourage you all to go to HBS IWA and consult the data sets that are there. We're moving to a world where we can analyze thousands of companies. We've already published 1,800 companies' environmental footprint from their operations in dollar terms. And when we begin to analyze this data, we discover some amazing things. If I tell you that 250 of these 1,800 companies deliver more environmental damage in a year than they do profit, that a third of them, 600 or so, deliver environmental damage equivalent to a quarter or more of their profit, that together they deliver $3 trillion of environmental damage in a year, and that there already exists, and this is the punchline, a correlation in many sectors between higher levels of pollution and lower stock market valuations. Then you begin to get a peep into the future. We will be adding hundreds of companies to the environmental impact from operations in the next few days. In the next 3 weeks or so, we will be publishing the employment impact of 3,000 companies measuring diversity, advancement, differences in gender pay, and so on. And in July, we will be publishing several hundred companies' product impact across 10 different sectors. This is the future, and this is why you see IOSCO, which brings together the group's regulators focusing on impact transparency, IFRS Foundation, which is responsible for financial accounting outside of the United States, setting up a sustainable accounting standards board, the EU, the Biden administration's SEC, France, Britain, and many other countries across the world, taking steps to provide this transparency. So we really are at the threshold, or at the beginning. We're no longer at the threshold when you look at the shareholder meetings of ExxonMobil and Procter & Gamble and the ruling against Shell. We are at the beginning of an impact revolution, which is going to disrupt business models and investing as deeply as the tech revolution has done.
So Ronnie, I want to pile on, and Tanvi, thank you for your question. Hello, everyone. So my view to your question is it's not a fad. It's both an imperative and an opportunity. And if we step back, let's look at the last 40 years. I think the business world has been dominated by two thought leaders, Milton Friedman with shareholder primacy and Bob McNamara with scientific top-down management. I think that when we look at the world we're in, we can all agree that the world we live in is not perfect, right? We've had a health crisis, economic crisis, societal crisis, racial crisis in many countries, environmental crisis, and then geopolitical tensions. In my opinion, is that the root cause of the situation we're in has much to do with these two individuals who are on my FBI most wanted list, Milton Friedman and Bob McNamara. To Ronnie's point, you know, what I see is the rise. We've had shareholder activism. I think what we're seeing now is the rise of stakeholder activism. And Ronnie, you said, right? Employees demand something better from companies. Customers do. Shareholders do. You highlighted ESG. I remember receiving, when I was the CEO of Best Buy, Larry Fink's letter about long-term strategy and purpose, and he's been piling on together with State Street and Vanguard and so forth. And of course, the community and the planet adding to this. So here's the good news. So it's an imperative. It's also the good news. I think we're at the beginning of a new era, and where we need a better formula for business. In my vision of that better formula, which is actually can be a key contributor not only to common good but also to great performance, is the vision of business pursuing a noble purpose. So addressing key needs in the world through their unique capabilities, putting people at the center, embracing all stakeholders. Right. So we need a declaration of interdependence. Business cannot be successful in isolation. Best Buy is headquartered in Minneapolis, following the horrible murder of George Floyd. When the city is on fire, right, you cannot open your stores. You cannot run a business. If the planet is on fire, to, you know, quote our colleague Rebecca Anderson, cannot run the business. And so we need this declaration of interdependence. And then the last piece of the vision is to treat profit as an outcome. I think the big mistake has been to treat profit as the sole focus. And I think it's poisonous, it's wrong. And if we treat it as an outcome by focusing on purpose and people and all stakeholders, then we can create great outcomes. I can testify from my own personal experience when, and it's more than one data point, but to make it very concrete. When I took over Best Buy in 2012, everybody thought, right, Ronnie, that we were going to die. It was zero buy recommendation on the stock. And the low of the share price was $11. It's now $115. But at the same time, we've now become an employer of choice. We've reduced significantly shareholder. We've increased, you know, starting wages. We've vastly increased customer satisfaction, and we've tried to be a force for good, vastly reducing our carbon footprint. You know, we have a recycling program for, you know, in the US, you can bring your old technology. We're working on the circular economy. We've tried also to be good citizens in our community, addressing some of the world's most pressing needs. So for me, it's an imperative. You have to make peace with it, right? But it's also a great opportunity because business can be a force for good. In fact, if you look at the Edelman report, trust report, at least in the US, certainly, companies are the most trusted organization. And because we all bring our work, our, you know, ability to companies, and if we step back and ask ourselves, right, why do we work? Right? Is it just for the money, or is it to make a positive difference in the world? And if you see companies as human organizations made of individuals working together in pursuit of a goal, that goal has got to be to contribute to the common good. And it's much more energizing, stimulating to see it that way. Now the challenge, and I know I want, you know, make sure we discuss this. This requires us to vastly rethink, you know, not only how we work, but also why we work, but also what is a company? How do we run it? How do we approach strategy? How do we approach decision making? How do we approach, you know, leadership and mobilizing our organizations? And I want to make sure that on Monday morning when we go back to work, we're clear on some things we can do. So it's an imperative. I think it's a very exciting opportunity as well, Tanvi.
Thank you. So I see both of you agree it's inevitable. So given that you think it's inevitable, what do you think are the main implications for business? What are the implications, particularly in terms of measurement, of strategy, leadership, and innovation? So there's alumni of HEC can actually go and implement this.
Shall I go first, Hubert?
Ronnie, you know, you go by alphabetic order on the last name, okay?
Thank you. So the paradigm is shifting the rules of the game, or the goalposts, more accurately, for business, Tanvi. We're going from risk-return to risk-return impact. And there are many reasons why the profitability of companies with risk-return impact optimization should be higher, given today's circumstances, than risk-return alone. If we look at the risk side first, we can already see signs of regulation and taxation coming to carbon emissions, right? So if you know that Shell creates $39 billion of environmental damage in a single year from its operations, forgive me, ExxonMobil creates that, 39 billion, Shell creates 24, and BP 13 billion a year, you'd have to be perverse to invest in ExxonMobil. And of course, we've just seen a revolution with 4 directors being kicked off their board. This effort to optimize risk-return impact also has big implications on the return side. We can see examples already. You can take Tesla, of companies that enter an existing market with the idea of disrupting it through impact. So Elon Musk didn't go into the automobile industry because it was an easy place to deliver profits. He went in because he wanted to shift the industry away from the combustion engine. And what's happened? He's worth 5 of his competitors put together today. His share price multiplied 7 times last year alone. And I want to give you just an insight into this return dimension, because the innovation that we saw in the last 4 decades is now going to be applied to tackling social and environmental issues in new and innovative ways. And this is a good example of it. There's a company in Israel called Orcam, which I mentioned in my book, Impact, which created spectacles to help the blind. The spectacles have a little memory stick-like device off the side, which whispers into the ear of the wearer the page of the book they're reading, even recognizes up to 300 people who've previously been registered into it. You'd say, amazing, transforms the lives of 35 million and 250 million, 35 million blind people and 250 million visually impaired people. But if you ask yourself the question with an impact purpose in mind, how can this technology help the maximum number of people? You get a surprising answer, which is, what if you provided these spectacles to the 800 million illiterate adults in the world? What would that do for their lives and their livelihoods? And so you can see that businesses are going to have challenges and opportunities. They're going to need transition paths in order to reduce their emissions and also improve their diversity. And then they're going to be addressing markets that serve more vulnerable people in new ways, which will enable them to grow faster and to be more profitable than those who continue to optimize just risk and return. Over to you, Hubert, for your view.
Yeah, in 1789, Louis XVI asked one of his ministers, "Is this a revolt?" And Monsieur de la Rochefoucauld replied, "No, sire, it's a revolution." And I think that what's going through now is revolutionary in terms of how we approach business. I'll mention 2 very specific implications. One is around how we approach strategy. You know, the traditional way of approaching strategies, you look at product market, you do customer research, segmentation, you address customer needs. I think the idea of putting purpose, making purpose, the cornerstone of the strategy, is something that can unleash enormous growth. So you mentioned Tesla, of course. Let me mention a couple of other examples. At Best Buy, if you see the company as a retailer, you're focused maybe on brick and mortar, maybe some e-commerce, selling hardware products to consumers. If you define the purpose of the company, as we did, as enriching lives through technology by addressing key human needs, you get into a whole new set of growth opportunities, which, as we exit COVID, is quite helpful to companies. As an example, that's what led us to get into the health space, helping aging seniors stay and live in their home longer independently by using technology, putting sensors under their bed, under the sofa, in the kitchen, the bathroom, fall detection. And with AI and remote monitoring and care centers, you can detect if something goes wrong. And of course, that's a growth opportunity for Best Buy. Or the other example is the in-home advisor program, where if you're focused on really addressing the needs of customers, if the need is too complex, we'll come to them in their home and for free. And then we'll develop a proposal, and customer can always say no, but we are aspiring to become the CIO or CTO for the customer in their home, which, given the complexity of technology in our homes, is quite an opportunity. Similarly, if you're a hospital system, if you think about yourself as just a brick and mortar hospital system, you're very limited to what you can do. But if you define your strategy around being in the health and wellness industry, addressing needs in that area, with telemedicine and digital surgery, all of a sudden you can address the needs of patients around the world. So having a focus on being a force for good and a purpose allows you to vastly expand your addressable market. And it's important to get into strategy because many companies, right, Ronnie and Tanvi, today are talking about a noble purpose, but then you really need to translate it into something concrete. So first implication is a different look at strategy. The second implication is a very different look at how we lead, all of us as leaders. The old model of, taking a bunch of smart people, maybe all graduates of HEC, bring them together, create a smart strategy, and then communicate the plan and cascade it down into the organization. That doesn't work anymore. Why? Because people don't like to be told what to do. Raise your hands, right, if you like to be told what to do. Nobody does. And so I think as we lead, it's less about the leader being the superhero who is the smartest person in the room, has all of the answers and tell others what to do. And it's more somebody who can appeal to the intrinsic motivation of the employee. So one of the very practical things to do is not only to be clear about your own purpose as an individual, but be really clear about what drives the people on your team and in the company. So as an example, I remember a store manager at Best Buy in Boston. He would ask every one of the associates in the store, so about 100 of them on average at Best Buy, what is your dream? At Best Buy, outside of Best Buy, what is your dream? Okay? Write it down in the break room. And then he said, my role as your GM is to help you achieve your dream. And so in companies, if we can connect what drives the individuals working there with a noble purpose for the business, this is how magical things happen. And that's how you can unleash what I call human magic in organization. That's a very different approach to leadership. It's a leadership model. So for me, the role of, and I'll finish with that, the role of leaders has changed dramatically. The mission has changed. It used to be shareholder value maximization. Now it's about being a force for good. The scope has changed. It used to be about the four walls of the business, right, Ronnie? When you look at a company P&L, it used just to be the P&L of the company, no measure of the externalities. So the scope has changed. We now need to get involved in a relationship with all stakeholders. And then the leadership model has changed. We're moving from the superhero to the purposeful, vulnerable, authentic, caring leader. And we clearly saw that, during the pandemic, where there were so many great examples of leaders leading from a place of purpose and with humanity, not focused on hitting their quarterly earnings, but taking care of their employees, their customers, and making sure that they would come out of this crisis, stronger and better companies. So again, I think it's a revolution.
And your comments remind me, Hubert, of the people at the beginning of the tech revolution, where I was lucky to be around, who thought that tech would just revolutionize the computer industry and wouldn't affect their industry. And of course, they've been proved completely wrong, and those that were left behind by new entrants, even big leaders like IBM, have paid the price for it. Now, it seems to me, I don't know if you agree, that it's transparency on impacts which is really going to bring the change. Because when investors have the data and companies have the data to measure their impacts and compare them with their competitors, and when they go to shareholder meetings and have to answer questions about not just their profit performance, but their impact performance, then you begin to get real change. And I think the news is that this transparency will be with us within the next 3 to 5 years. At least it'll be mandated within the 3 to 5 years. We see these correlations between value and pollution. We'll see something similar perhaps when we get the diversity information out. This creates pressure on regulators to create fair markets where every investor has reliable information on a comparable basis at the same time. So I don't know if you agree, Hubert, that the time scale for this isn't decades. This revolution is going to get underway in the next 3 to 5 years as transparency really begins to be productive in terms of the data that's generated.
Yeah, so let me say a few things about this. One is, yes, this is now. And the reason why it needs now is that in my view, we have a few ticking time bombs, right? The environmental ticking time bomb, I think inequality in society, racial issues, the tensions, I think are there. And we don't have that much time. When you read, there's many books, but if you read Bill Gates' book around net zero, if we're going to be at net zero by 2050, because so much of the equipment that we put in place in 2030 is still going to be in place in 2050, we really have only 10, 15 years to implement the right technologies and invent the necessary ones. And so the timing is now. I think what I was calling the rise of stakeholder capitalism is going to help, meaning the pressure of the various stakeholders. I think the pressure of investors is very helpful. It's not just the investors now; it's so many different groups. I remember that when I got my first letter from Larry Fink in 2017 or 18, I forgot the exact date, when he was encouraging companies to talk about their purpose and long-term strategy. I personally hand-delivered my response to him, my shareholder letter, to his office in Midtown Manhattan to thank him for providing the air cover, for companies who were eager to move in that direction. Now, what I would add is that I think the change is not just going to come from outside-in pressure. What I see happening is that in the heart and soul of the leaders of companies, there is a desire. Forget about outside pressure. Sometimes, I don't need to be told. I can do it voluntarily. I think when I talk or listen to my colleagues, CEOs of large companies, vast majority of them, there's a genuine desire. I know fewer people in the oil and gas industry, I will admit this, but whether it's Satya Nadella at Microsoft, my friend John Barrow at Nike, Patrice Louvet at Ralph Lauren, Alex Gorski at J&J, just to quote, to do some name dropping, right? I think that they have in their heart, and all of us as human beings, we have a desire. And so that I'm a little bit actually wary about too much, bureaucracy around reporting. When I see some of the work the EU is doing, I think it's a bit overwhelming. And so I'm counting personally more on the intrinsic desire of us as human beings to do something good in the world, to leave a better place for children and grandchildren. I know I have 3 granddaughters, ages 6 months to 2.5 years. And I want to leave a better planet. So in terms of measurement, in fact, I think the measurements that are going to be imposed from the outside in, initially, right, Ronnie, they're not going to be perfect, but because this is hard work. And so I would encourage everybody listening at their companies to today, without waiting for SASB or the EU or the SEC to tell us what to measure, to actually define what are the relevant, important metrics for them, and see how it can all be tied together to create a better outcome, and use your internal engine. I think for me, a key implication in the crisis, and a key personal learning for me, I started as a McKinsey consultant, very analytical, problem solver, performance maximization. And I'll believe in human magic, Ronnie, and I didn't smoke anything illegal along the way. Not that I remember, at least. And if I did not inhale, right? But I believe, in human beings wanting to do something good. And I believe in our role as leaders, being responsible to create in our companies, because it's going to be one company at a time, a better future. Start with yourself, right? Leading with all of our body parts, not just the brain, but also the heart, the soul, the guts, the ears, and the eyes. Yeah. And making a difference where you are. And then the second step is within your industry. I think Paul Pullman is leading Imagine, which is a great initiative where there's industry level collaboration in the apparel industry, in the food industry, where you can do ecosystem level changes. And so I think there's a lot that can be done. And I think, the time is now for every one of us as leaders to decide how we want to show up in the next 12 months, in the next 36 months, in the next 10 years. What difference do we want to make? And what will my granddaughters tell me 5 years from now, 10 years from now?
And people don't realize, Hubert, that Adam Smith was prouder of his book about altruism and empathy, the theory of moral sentiments, than he was about the wealth of nations, which brought the famous phrase of the invisible hand of markets. And I think if he had appreciated that in the 21st century, we would be able to measure the impacts of companies, he might have put these 2 books into one and talked about impact being the invisible heart of markets to guide their invisible hand.
And what I love, Ronnie, about your work is that sometimes we've seen leaders blame shareholders, right, for the fact that they had to focus just on the short term and economic performance. And what I love about your work is that you're demonstrating that investors are there to be more demanding than just business is more than just for profit, right? And through your innovations, so I really encourage everybody to read Ronnie's book. It's very stimulating because you're proving that investment can be a force for good by finding situations where there's a need, and through public-private partnership. I love the example you give about people leaving jail, and how do we minimize the number of people going back to jail? It's so profitable to do this, but you can find investors whose return is going to be tied to the reduction in the number of people returning to jail. So I think that's genius. It's innovative and impactful. And any leader who believes that they can blame their shortcomings and blame it on shareholders, I think is very short-sighted. Investors, who are investors, right? Investors, they're people, we give them our money, right? So they are also people, and we expect them to, create a better future for us when we retire. And if the planet is burning when we retire, that's not a great outcome. So I think the interests of the various stakeholders are increasingly aligned. And I wanted to publicly thank you for your highlighting this area, innovating in this area, advancing the work with George Serafin, our colleague, on measurements. This is very important work you're doing. And so we're counting on you, Ronnie.
And well, I want to return the compliment, because I think anybody listening today who wants to understand the implications for business of this paradigm shift must read Hubert's book. This is happening at a macro and micro level. And I think what you've heard today is a view that encompasses both, and should give you a path to great success if you're working for a company, or if you're creating your own company, or if you're an investor.
So we are short on time. Maybe we'll just one question from the chat, because we have numerous questions over here. So I'll pick this one. So what's your opinion on activist shareholders? Do you believe this type of action for impact will expand in the future?
Hubert, why don't you go first?
So there's different types of activist shareholders, right? There's activist shareholders, the traditional ones, who are spotting companies that have some kind of vulnerability. Maybe there's too much cash on the balance sheet. Maybe the profitability of the growth is too low. Maybe the board is not as independent as you'd like. And for all of our listeners, a good exercise on an ongoing basis, at least once per year, is to assess your vulnerability to potential attacks from these traditional activists, because you don't want to be in a battle with them, because it's incredibly distractive. So why wait? If you know you have too much cash on their balance sheet, just return it, and that will avoid a big distraction. Now there's this rise of stakeholder activism where certain shareholders will seize an issue and try to push for the election of a director, or for the passage of a resolution at the annual shareholder meeting. And that pressure again can come from shareholders as well as other stakeholders. I think the same discipline, is appropriate. Be aware of the areas where your holistic performance, not just profitable performance, but your performance vis-a-vis all stakeholders, be aware of the risk you have and where your shortcomings are. And don't wait to be under attack, because it's going to be embarrassing. And you should expect that if you have a weakness, somebody's going to attack you. So as an example, I think it was 2 weeks ago, there was a group of advertising agencies, Black, African-American owned advertising agencies, that took a full page, I think it was New York Times, with a letter addressed to the board and the management team at McDonald's, saying, how come we've not been part of the consultation process for the selection of your advertising agencies? If you don't reach out to us, we'll consider that you are just a bunch of racists. All right? And I think that's obviously an area where, certainly in the US, the topic of diversity and inclusion, in particular from a racial standpoint, has been vastly elevated. And companies that don't act, that just talk and don't act, will be attacked. I see it as a healthy pressure. You can be angry at these pressures, or you can see it as healthy and as a reminder to be on the front foot on the various dimensions of your impact in the world.
I think about what's going to happen, and Tanvi, what's going to happen is exactly as Hubert describes, the publication of transition plans by companies in order to avoid activist pressure. So companies, if they see what's happening in these big shareholder meetings we've described, are going to begin to think now of getting their impact measured and trying to address some of it before they get attacked. And we may well get to a world, Tanvi, where transition plans are approved at shareholder meetings, not just for climate, but for social as well, for diversity and inequality of pay, and in particular. And so I think what we're going to find is we have to solve for environmental and social impact at the same time. Transition plans will be published by companies about both.
Okay, since we're short on time, I understand both of you have appointments after this. So I'll hand over the mic to Dean Massini to take, say, the final words of the debate.
No, thank you very much. Well, Sir Ronald, Hubert, thank you so much for taking the time of doing that. I mean, this is a huge responsibility for us, because when a message like that doesn't come from an environmental activist, but from two very well-known business leaders, it's very, very powerful. So as an institution, as an educational institution, we feel the responsibility of putting that into action, educating our next generation of leaders to make sure that it is not only the invisible hand, but the visible heart that is taught to our students. And I know that you're too modest to talk about it, but for all our participants who would like to go deeper, let me just remind the books that he wrote. So if you want to dig deeper, please read them very carefully. Impact by Sir Ronald, and of course, The Heart of Business by Hubert Joly. These are very passionate readings. I suggest that if you read them, you don't consider that as airport books, but you take the time to read it carefully when you have time, when you can concentrate, and when you can reflect on the messages that they are delivered. And if I may, I'm an Italian. I don't like to wake up early. I know, Hubert, you had to do so to attend this session. So thank you so much for doing that. Once again, have a wonderful continuation of this session to all attendees. Thank you, Sir Ronald. Thank you, Hubert. I hope to meet you in person next time we have the opportunity of doing so.
Too much.
And the